Fincher! Fincher! Yeah, it's me, Colleen. Colleen's Mangarex of YouTube. You know what? Ring up Aaron Sorkin while you're at it. You know that next social network you were looking for? Well, listen to this.
I'm Stu Levy, founder of Tokyo Pop. Yoroshiku. For many years, I've been bringing Japanese pop culture to America, and now I've decided to take a journey across this land to search for otaku culture.
There's nothing that kills a company more than the bloated ego of a businessman. We see this time and again where corporate greed mixed with the inflated hubris of man ruins whatever is decent. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg don't just run their massive tech businesses, they also posit themselves as the faces of them. They desire to not just be billionaires, but also have the fame, recognition, and celebrity on top of it. Those are massive companies, though. A niche industry like anime and manga would never be able to breed a similar deification of the self. These are just little guys that are fans like you and me. But where there's fame and success, you're bound to find people who are enticed by what it has to offer. Enter Stu Levy, the founder of the once massive Japanese pop culture related company Tokyo Pop. A company that every year found Stu sticking his head ever so slowly up his own ass that he could barely operate the company anymore. This once inescapable manga giant has now since receded to the corners of our minds, only to be remembered when you find an overflowing shelf of their old titles and half-price books. With how much Tokyo Pop dominated the manga industry in the 90s and 2000s, its downfall is one for the books. It had entirely changed how manga was sold in America. That everything done the way it is now is because of Tokyo Pop. They made manga sold in bookstores cool, which in turn brought the new consumer of teen girls to comics. Unflipped manga, the $10 volume. Even the success of Sailor Moon, Fruits Basket, and Shoujo overall is thanks in part to them. Due to this, it'd be the understatement of a century if you were to say that Levy isn't enemy number one in the manga community now. There is enough reasons to count on two hands as to why this is. Even going all the way before Tokyo Pop was even called Tokyo Pop, Levy was the puppet master of his own disaster. The guy couldn't seem to get out of his own way to run a proper company, even if he did fundamentally change manga distribution as we know it. And because of that, at times, it feels like he kind of just accidentally stumbled into the fortune he came across. There is a lot of good that Levy introduced as his time as the CEO of Tokyo Pop, but there's also a lot of bad. If he is going to position himself as the face of the company, then when things start to backfire, the blame is gonna fall on him. That's why I invented the patent-pending Head Up Your Own Assimeter. This is a nifty tool that helps us discern how far a company's owner went up their own ass before there was a point of no return. Anytime I deem Levy has gotten a little too big for his britches, we're gonna fill up this old meter here. Now, flashback to 1997. You're in your room listening to Semi-Charmed Life. Your hair's pinned back in butterfly clips, and you're playing with your starving Tamagotchi that yearns for death like a crusty white dog. This is also the year in which Levy, along with Ron Scoville and Victor Chen, met at an entrepreneur conference. The three of them had discussed wanting to bring manga to America from Japan, as few companies were doing it at this time. The idea seemed lucrative enough, and they started up their company called Mix Entertainment with the help of USC, aiming to pave the way for digital pop culture before BTS ever could. I hope I have enough K-pop fans in the audience to get that joke. This company didn't go straight into graphic novel publishing, and rather trying their hand out at a fully centered manga magazine first. No articles, ads, or otherwise, just pure unadulterated manga titles in a magazine that they called Mixzine. Levy, who was living in Japan at the time, was able to get in contact with Kodansha and license some of the most insane manga titles you could imagine for the first foray into publishing. If you were to tell me now that some rinky-dink publisher was able to get the likes of Sailor Moon and Magic Knight Rayearth, I'd laugh in your face. Yet here we are with the first introduction of these two iconic manga in the States in this first issue of McZine. In a blog post by renowned translator and editor Rachel Thorne, she gives credit to Levy for having given Sailor Moon a chance, saying that this manga was probably deemed worthless by the entertainment industry at the time due to the sentiment that girls don't watch cartoons. A sentiment that is still pretty much held today, but in a shiny new repackaged statement of girls grow out of cartoons. Either way, Sailor Moon was not the powerhouse it is today back then, and mostly because the anime was hardly popular in America. So staking your company right out the gate on a relatively unpopular manga for girls is something that was incredibly brave to try out for a budding publisher. Points to them for that. This move paid off for them as Sailor Moon was far and away their most popular title to come out of McZine. It basically became the reason that a lot of people even subscribed to it, eventually giving the company enough reason to run it as a graphic novel outside of the magazine in a manga line that they called pocket manga. Since manga at the time was standardized to be in more larger trims, their goal was to make manga more pocket-sized and on the go. This was apparently a great strategy for them as well, since the third volume of Sailor Moon ended up becoming a #1 bestseller. And this was only a couple years after the business first launched, so they were doing great. That's the end of all the good stuff in this era of Mix, though. Time to get into all the horribly dumb decisions that made fans so annoyed they were completely turned off from this company before they even made it big. After a year in the McZine run, Levy decided to remove Sailor Moon from this magazine and add it to a completely new magazine that they were making for girls called Smile. The only problem was that this move happened before many people knew not to renew their subscriptions to McZine, as the notice didn't come out until the next magazine, which hadn't even released yet. Plus, the Sailor Moon that was running in Smile magazine had completely skipped over an arc in the story, and no one had context for what was happening unless they went back and bought the pocket manga as well. Meaning that Sailor Moon fans at the time had to spend money on 3 separate things just to get the full story of Sailor Moon. This decision to move Sailor Moon was happening at the very same time that Scoville, who was one of the co-founders, ended up leaving the company as well. And he did not go quietly. Scoville had huge gripes with Levy and how he was running the company. One of his biggest issues being the handling of Sailor Moon. He went as far as saying that moving Sailor Moon without making sure that people knew it was moving was an intentional decision on Levy's part. Obviously, Levy disagreed with this and said that Scoville was a terrible worker, was only an honorary editor-in-chief, was spreading libel, and that he was personally fired. I had to make sure I looked at my screen for that because he had so many accusations against him. Now, I can't say who is in the right and who is in the wrong here. At the time, most people ended up siding with Scoville on the matters just because they were already annoyed with the company's changes and what they were doing. But as time has gone on, some people decided they were probably too harsh on Levy as well. My opinion here is mostly just that Levy comes off as so unprofessional in all of these interviews and press releases. They read so much less like an actual organization statement and more like Logan Paul hitting back at the hecklers on Twitter about lunch leave mold. So while the whole thing is really a he said, maybe I can see us moving like that, it still didn't look great as an outsider looking in with just how childish Levy was acting. On a side note, Mix kind of seemed to patronize the shoujo consumer and shoujo as a whole when it was first starting. Smile's early magazine designs and decisions were absolutely terrible and just felt so trashy. The magazine only ran Sailor Moon in it for a good year, and everything else was basically articles, ads, and editorials on real-life people. It was basically the exact opposite of MixZine, which prided itself on being a fully manga-centered magazine. Seeing their girls' manga magazine look more like a teen magazine that you could just find on the shelf at a Walmart feels like they really didn't care about anything other than that Sailor Moon money they could drain out of your pocket. Especially when they went on record saying that Magic Knight Rayearth may be a shoujo, but it's still boyish enough that boys could read it, so it's not gonna move to Smile magazine. Smile did end up changing to an all-manga magazine after about a year and a half. I'm guessing the reason for this is that having zero manga in your manga magazine as a manga publisher wasn't, a great business idea. When Smile went full manga in 2000, it ended up adding series like G-Line and Peach Girl to it. Then, for the last year, it added even more titles like Planet Ladder, Mars, and the Clampwork Clover. This last year is also when they started to find it more lucrative to have straight-to-graphic novel sales, and this is when they added Saint Tail, Miracle Girls, and Cardcaptors to their repertoire. This was an imprint that they ended up calling Chicks Comics. And just for that, let's fill that up. Levy may have given shoujo a fighting chance and been the one to popularize it, but you know what? At the very least, Rachel Thorne wasn't patronizing when she was first bringing it over. By the end of 2001, the company known as Mix was dying out, and the beginnings of Tokyopop branding was springing from its grave. When Scoville left the team, Levy needed a new partner, and he found this in Mike Kiley. They started up Tokyopop.com as a distribution site for any video games, anime, or manga that they were selling in 1998. Eventually growing the brand enough that Mix Entertainment was clashing with the brand of Tokyopop. The switch started towards the end of the 90s, slowly removing any branding or logos from any of their merchandise. MixZine turned into Tokyopop Magazine, and Pocket Manga turned into Tokyopop Manga. At the start of a new decade, the manga business was booming, but these manga magazines just weren't hitting like they used to. Both the Tokyopop Magazine and Smile Magazine ended up getting discontinued, and Tokyopop turned to just focusing on graphic novel sales. The only problem is that they had some heated competition by this point with Viz Media. Ranma Half was already a huge seller from years before, and Viz was starting to build up their own shoujo collection with titles like Fushigi Yugi. So, Levy and Tokyopop had to do something drastic if they wanted to beat them in sales. In these early days of publishing, manga was all flipped and published in larger trims. Flipping the manga was the practice of mirroring the artwork so it could be read left to right like Americans do. We're tiny toddlers who need to be catered to at all times, after all. This process of flipping the artwork was tedious and time-consuming, though. It made releases slow, only coming out every 6 months or so. It made the artwork look kinda wonky, and it cost a lot of extra money to boot. All things that made Tokyopop say, fuck that, let's do the opposite. The decision to unflip manga that was sold in stores was a huge gamble for Tokyopop in 2002. No one had ever done it before, and the consensus was pretty much that they just wouldn't sell. But despite this, focus groups that Tokyopop ran showed that people were responding positively to this change. Maybe Americans aren't such huge bitch baby bedwetting thumbsuckers like I originally thought. Note to self, don't write jokes like this when there is a big election coming up and you have the possibility of losing many of your rights. The plan to unflip manga was unveiled in February of 2002, and the rollout was to begin only a few months later. This would be called their 100% authentic manga line, which would completely change manga publishing in the States ever since. The standard manga volume went down to $9.99, releases came out every month or so, the how-to reading guide was put in the back of the book, and history was made. The launch of the new line was an immediate success as well, bringing in millions of sales for the company, and 1 month alone having sold 200,000 copies of manga. It sold so well that graphic novels and manga began getting their own displays in bookstores. Walden's Books in particular was a huge reason why manga has become assimilated into chain stores. The combination of affordable prices and accessibility coincided to make this new format for manga a smash hit, skyrocketing Tokyopop and Levi by proxy into stardom. No other publisher could ignore what Tokyopop and Levi did and eventually ended up following suit. Another huge change the popularity of this manga line brought to comics was the teen girl consumer. A really big reason that Tokyopop got as big as it did is because they wanted to be accessible to the public. They tried to get manga to have as broad of an audience as possible. Bookstores like Borders or Walden's were in malls where girls already were that didn't make them feel isolated or like they couldn't go in. Subsequently, because they found this new audience, shoujo manga was one of the biggest reasons that many people started getting into manga at this time. Tokyopop was seeing general success, but there was not yet a manga that defined their company as a whole. You know, every publisher or manga imprint has one series that makes them who they are. Viz had Naruto and eventually Vampire Knight. Dark Horse has Berserk, so on and so forth. It wasn't until 2003 when a little-known series called Fruits Basket came along for this company. Fruits Basket was their golden goose. Their bestseller by a mile, with 2 million copies sold in just the first 15 volumes alone. The series constantly ranked in BookScan charts up until its very last volume, and really opened the floodgates for investing in shoujo as a whole. Fruits Basket was so popular, it basically became Tokyopop's metric for their own success. In one interview I found, Kylie ended up saying, "Well, this series is selling good, but it's no Fruits Basket." I need you to look me in the screen right now. Don't look away. Come back. Come back. Are you doing laundry right now? Come back right now. I need you to look me in the screen and tell me that you would ever think a phrase like that would be said again. We were seeing the likes of DN Angel, Fruits Basket, and Kare Kano selling like hotcakes back then. Even their competitor Viz was getting huge with titles like Hot Gimmick and Full Moon. Oh, and I also need to mention the fact that Tokyopop's pretty big for being one of the first publishers to introduce josei manga to the American manga audience. We got most of Mari Okazaki's titles from them, as well as the very popular series like Tramps Like Us, Pet Shop of Horrors, and Paradise Kiss. If I'm gonna be facetious here, we reached true equality in the manga market in 2004. I think a statement like Kylie's is nigh impossible now, since shoujo hasn't really gotten on the BookScan charts since 2014 now. Which, surprise, surprise, is only a few years after big bookstore chains went out of business and shoujo manga and their magazines were getting less licensed and started getting more discontinuations. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I don't think you guys don't know what happened in 2008. It's not like it's going to be some big middle of the video plot twist I'll be introducing. Now, with the positivity of this era out of the way, I get to be a little meanie again. While the sales for manga from Japan was soaring, Tokyopop decided they needed to cut some corners so they could do things cheap. Instead of having to buy licenses coming from another company, why don't they just make manga in America? You can just barely pay creators who would have had no other opportunities to be making manga series, and you can use that limiting factor to take advantage of them. Now introducing the Rising Stars of Manga. This was a competition introduced by Tokyopop in 2002 that aimed to make a name for OEL manga, or original English language manga. The initiative would grant cash prizes to winners, and the grand prize winner would have the opportunity to pitch a 3-book deal to Tokyopop. I'm sorry, I can't help but laugh. You have the opportunity to pitch something that they might not even greenlight. How is that an award? Out of everyone who submitted their stories, 10 would be published in the anthology manga they would release called Rising Stars of Manga. Some of the series to come out of this competition were Peach Fuzz, which I actually remember picking up from the library as a kid, and another manga called Biezengast by Biesengest, which was the second ever winner of the competition and probably the most known out of any of the other titles. The series that came out of the Rising Stars of Manga did seem to do relatively well for being OEL manga and not Japanese language manga, and at the time, Tokyopop did actually seem to have an investment in this initiative. However, some of the more sinister sides of the competition began to arise, showing the ass of both Tokyopop and their growing corporate greed. By 2008, the Rising Stars of Manga competition was doing decently well for them, but because it was 2008, they were starting to run out of money, I wonder why, and needed a cheap venture. Since so many artists were submitting to this competition but didn't get to pitch 3-volume book deals, they decided to start a new initiative called the Shining Stars Pilot Program. A program where you get the opportunity to sign away your moral rights and a contract that tries to use relatable humor to ease you into a false sense of security. You want to sign away your rights to have your name possibly not be credited on your work of art for some serious fun? Go for it! In their pact, they want you to let them take your name off the series if the space is needed, and any legal issues you may eventually have would mean you'd have to physically go to California to deal with them. No ifs, ands, or buts. And speaking of butts, these problems were expounded on going into the 2008 market crash, the ever-looming cataclysmic event that happens in every single one of these publisher videos I have made so far. It's the equivalent of the snap. Many have entered the publishing game before 2008. But few have left unscathed. There were quite a few casualties immediately after the market crash happened, and Tokyopop was no exception. They ended up laying off 30 employees because they decided to split up their company in 2 different divisions, one side being for publishing and the other side being for more multimedia marketing. As well as having their manga output, they went from 500 titles in a year to like 200. Still though, Tokyopop was a manga publishing titan like Viz Media. Of course they're gonna get hit, of course bad times are gonna come on them, but you would still imagine them to end up sunny side up. They had a few things going against them, though, that Viz did not. The first issue that Tokyopop was having was that they vastly overpublished manga and were seeing little return in investments, eventually spreading their sales so thin with how many of the licenses they were buying up. This overpublishing actually was kind of a gift for some shoujo fans, considering the fact that they ended up publishing a lot of shoujo titles you wouldn't have expected them to otherwise. We got series like Gakuen Alice, Immortal Rain, and Kadocha, and I don't think we would have ever gotten those otherwise if it weren't for the fact that Tokyopop just wanted titles. But the overpublishing is also the reason why we don't have completed endings for a lot of sought-after shoujo titles now. Tokyopop eventually couldn't see them to completion. Another thing that happened was in 2009 when Tokyopop lost all the rights to Kodansha Manga, one of their biggest publishers that they had been working with since Mixed Days. This was actually due to the fact that Kodansha was starting to open their own publishing company, so they kind of wanted their rights to their works back so they could sell them themselves. All of Tokyopop's early titles like Mars, Sailor Moon, Cardcaptors, Magic Knight, Rayearth were all from Kodansha, which meant that they no longer had the rights to continue printing new volumes of these series. Plus, they still had some other ongoing titles from Kodansha that got cancelled midway through, like Life and Initial D, both of which are actually coming out from Kodansha right now. While Tokyopop and Levy claim that this had no impact on their bottom line, I still think that Kodansha pulling the rug out from under them probably had corporate shaking in their boots. Losing the rights to republish some of your biggest titles is never going to be a good thing. Then what put the nail in their eventual coffin was the bankruptcy of Borders and Walden's in 2011. These two stores were the most crucial aspects of sales for Tokyopop. They were once responsible for over 40% of manga sales in the US, which meant that them not paying money back was going to put Tokyopop in a dire state. They were not making their money back on any sales of over hundreds of series that they were placing in these stores. But don't worry, Levy is a top creative entrepreneurial genius under the moniker DJ Milky. Actually, can we just... Yeah, no, a little bit more. Yeah, that feels right. Only his true creative vision could save Tokyopop from the brink of death. So what was Levy doing in 2008 to 2010 to help bring this company back? Anything except manga publishing. The man would have like 20 different ventures that he would just start and stop at any moment when he didn't feel like it anymore. He tried producing, then making movies. He wrote his own OEL manga with Courtney Love. The list goes on and on and on. Levy has described himself as an instinctual entrepreneur who just follows his gut and goes with a cool idea he has. Which I guess is a great way to run a hobby business, but not so much when you have the livelihood of 100 employees in your hands. It was becoming clear towards the end of Tokyopop that Levy just had no interest in being a publisher anymore. In an interview, he even said, "I always wanted to be a rock star, be in a band, but I never pursued that. It's been a hobby, but I never got into the performance side. My inner rock star always wanted to get out on the road and do that." And his decisions showed that he was only caring about the fame. While all these internal issues were happening with Tokyopop, Levy decided he wanted to host his own otaku reality TV show. Instead of, I don't know, trying to prevent his company from collapsing. Alas, this wasn't the case. America's Greatest Otaku was an amalgamation of the culminating ego of Levy. This showed his increasing disinterest in his own publishing company, and that he only wanted to improve his relatable cool guy image. Especially since he said himself that he knew this show would not make the company money. He was doing it for a halo effect. But this reality show did the opposite of what he wanted. It got lambasted by the community and basically took away any good faith anyone had for Levy. Maybe a less self-focused owner would have already known something like that would happen when their own company is already struggling. Well, America's Greatest Otaku would eventually air in 2011, but wouldn't you know it? Tokyopop ended up laying off most of their staff while it was airing, only leaving 6 employees, a few of the heads of the company and some freelancers, to run this multi-million-dollar company. What was Levy doing while these layoffs were happening? He was tweeting, of course, saying how out of touch the book industry was and how much fun he was having at the GDC. Yay! I love rich businessmen who have no actual connection to the humans that help run their business. Manga is so out of touch. Brush off that otaku negativity. Gambaro, Levy-san. It's not a surprise that a month after the layoffs, Levy and Tokyopop announced that their American division of the company would be shutting down in 2011. The once manga publishing titan that had ushered in the era of Sailor Moon and Fruits Basket had eventually fallen. Effective immediately, the US branch of the company would close and all of the rights to any of their licenses would go back to the owners. This didn't affect the TV media side of the company or the German publishing branch, which is why some German Tokyopop fans may not be as harsh on this company as an American fan would. I actually don't know if any Germans have similar issues with Levy like Americans do, so I'm curious about that. Let me know in the comments. With news of the closure, Levy ended up releasing a statement of his own, which obviously was entirely self-congratulatory. I mean, I still give credit where it's due for Tokyopop, but I doubt when you laid off a ton of people and no longer have manga licenses, people really want to hear about your creative endeavors. Also, when you close a company, I don't think you should be saying that the manga revolution has won. You're closing down one of the biggest publishers in the manga industry. How is that a win? Not to mention all those OEL manga authors whose rights are now stuck in limbo because the works return to the owner, which is Tokyopop. The head up your own ass meter is blown off the charts right now. We can't even scale this shit anymore. When all is said and done, Levy wasted so much of the good reputation that he had garnered through the 90s and much of the 2000s. Making manga accessible and cheap opened up a huge new sector of comics for people who would never have dreamed of being catered to. Fruits Basket and Cardcaptors were literally the first two manga I ever read as a kid, so without Tokyopop, I literally would not be here right now. Whether or not he actually cared about shoujo and the teen girl consumer, Levy is still instrumental in making shoujo what it is today in America. But that sentiment doesn't negate the ego that got in his way at every turn. The cheaper and faster manga became, the cheaper translation fees got, which brought down the standard industry pay, something Rachel Thorne referred to as the Tokyopop effect. The more money that rolled in from the unflipped manga line and teen girls who finally felt seen, the more money Levy could funnel into his other media projects he cared about more. Tokyopop became merely a means to his desired end. Today, Tokyopop does still exist and reopened in the States in 2016, but to a much smaller scale. They now consider themselves a boutique publisher that wants quality over quantity, deciding to focus more on romance manga that have queer identities or diverse stories at the forefront. This is probably their best strategy going forward with this new vision for Tokyopop America, since BL is only gonna be on the up. I've actually even found myself buying a couple of their newer licenses, like We Can't Do Plain Love and Since I Could Die Tomorrow. Otherwise, this new iteration of Tokyopop is pretty low-key and trying to fly under the radar, doing just enough to get by with their Disney manga. In the meantime, Levy does still own the company, but has since stepped back since moving to Germany in 2023. Although once again, he disagreed with the press release from his company saying that he stepped back, stating that he's just not there on day-to-day operations and focuses on the bigger picture now. And he's letting someone else take that wheel as he's off producing anime with the Saudi-owned NBC group. One such anime airing this season that I'm actually watching, and I got jump scared by his name on the screen, Acro Trip. After I went through all of the articles on Tokyopop, all of the press releases and interviews he's done, and even some of Levy's own blog posts, I couldn't help but end up comparing him to the portrayal of Mark Zuckerberg in The Social Network. A guy who felt he had everything to prove because he started out on the bottom. One who couldn't take an ounce of criticism and continually had to hit back at the haters online who were mean. I don't think by any means Levy has done the same amount of immense damage that the Zuck has with Facebook, nor do I think he even close to makes that amount of money, but he very much feels like that Silicon Valley type of guy. He's got big ideas, big dreams, and was okay with stepping on anyone who could get him there, even if it meant he'd end up a bit scummy. Since Levy is still around, I do kind of feel bad for harping on him so much. However, his rise to fame and subsequent fall are so known by anime fans that basically no one bats an eye at this point. Stu Levy has become the anime pariah. Fans in the mixed days know him as the guy who tried to drain them of Sailor Moon money and kicked out a co-founder. Fans now know him as the guy who tried to swindle artists out of their rights in their work. And industry people know him as the guy who couldn't stick to a plan, ultimately bringing an end to the first manga boom in America. Such is the hubris of Stu Levy.